care about anything but me. Yes, I just love him 'cause he's so crazy, just crazy about me.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love my ugly boy, so rough and tough, don't care about anything but me. Yes, I just love him 'cause he's so crazy, just crazy about me.
So we were talking about government and the problems with government. So now we need to think about how we can possibly address them. How do we prevent financial corruption creeping in? How do we get a representative government that's also an effective government? How do we deal with protecting minorities from the majority will where necessary? The financial thing is tricky. There will always be a need for money in politics, and it has to come from somewhere, so that parties and individuals can promote themselves, get information in front of the voters, inform them about their positions and so on, so that they can then engineer consent and go forward and try and execute what it is that they're doing. If there's a brilliant candidate who you would definitely vote for, but you never hear about them, never hear about their policies, never hear their arguments, then that's not fair. If another candidate gets shitloads of money and is able to put their face everywhere, have a really slick presentation and so on, that does sway people. And that's, again, unfair. Now, if you can look at the American system to see where this has gone to the extreme, with funding and so on sneaking around like a rich company avoiding tax and so on, and millions upon millions being pumped into these things. So how do you stop that? Well, you say no funding and you put the requirement on the state. You've got state broadcasters who can put out adverts for people who are standing. You can make requirements for a certain degree of existing standing before they go forwards. You can host debates and so on public TV. You can make allowances of certain budgets, and you can make them fair, so that Party A, Party B and Party C all have the same potential for exposure out there. So that's one way you can make it fair. You can control the amount of money that can be used. You can even out the access between different groups. So that's one way that you can push money out of politics. The other problem we have, of course, is people buying influence. So that if they fund a campaign, they get favours in return. This is obvious if you look at the history, again, mostly of American politics, but it happens in British politics too, with lobbying firms flying people out for holidays and so on, or offering people positions once they leave government. You know, if they lose an election, if they're unseated from government, they will often move straight onto a board of directors for a company who, strangely, they seem to have done a lot of good things for while they were in government. Odd that. Yeah, this is another issue. There's a couple of ways you can handle that. You can try and make sure that politicians are paid enough that this is not tempting. That generally doesn't go over well. People don't feel that politicians should be immensely wealthy in that way. And then, again, looking at the American system, and to an extent the British system, politicians are often independently wealthy before they get into politics, because being wealthy helps you to get elected. Again, another issue. So how do we deal with that? You can make sure that they're not allowed to take donations and so on. This is how things were supposed to work, but we've had scandals both sides of the Atlantic of people taking bribes and so on anyway, and it took a long time for this to come out, and it was too late for a lot of decisions to be reversed. So the corruption's there. You've got to be much more watchful of it, and you have to create a culture, I think, in government of that you're there to serve, not to make money, and that you're there to serve the people, not the companies. How you do that, I don't know, but other than being very watchful and very hard line on people taking bribes, taking gifts and so on in exchange for favours, there don't seem to be a lot of other ways to do it. While we're at it, parties themselves present a problem. There's no room for nuanced positions within parties, especially within the British system. You're expected to vote along with your party, even if your conscience or your local representatives say otherwise. And that makes a nonsense of the idea that an MP is supposed to represent their local area, which is a justification often given to preserve the first past the post system. Parties have ruined that utterly. You have to rebel, and that can seriously damage your career if you go against the party line. That's a problem. If we have representatives, they should be more free to vote with their conscience independently. A party should be, I think, a looser structure that just says, I am broadly politically aligned with this set of ideals. But individual areas have their own needs. Individual politicians should vote with their independent conscience. Make the voting private, perhaps, in parliaments, so that you can't be brought up by the whip for not going along with the rest of the government. So you can vote independently with your conscience without those kinds of consequences to your career. Why not? When we vote as voters, it's kept private unless we publicise the way we're voting ourselves. Unless we tell people how we voted, no one's meant to know. So why is it different in government? Now, to an extent, you can say that there's an accountability issue there, in that the public has a right to know how their representatives are voting. But these are two competing problems, and I would be inclined to change it so that an MP's voting is private as well. And you can still see which way they went. You can still see the public line. You can still see the public statements that they make. But allow them the freedom to vote with their conscience in private. I think that would improve things. I think it's a trade-off. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but that would be a way to address that. Let's wrap up with the last problem. We don't tend to get experts in positions of power in our systems. We get expert politicians. We don't get expert medical professionals in charge of our medical decisions. We don't get expert military professionals in charge of our military decisions. We don't get scientists making decisions about science funding. We don't get engineers making decisions about technology funding. There's this hostility, weirdly, to experts, but these are the people who surely should be able to make the best, most informed decisions. So how do we either encourage experts into politics, or, as a potential other side to it, force government and the public at large to pay more attention to what the experts are telling them and to go along with it? Democracy relies upon an informed populace, and many things are very complicated and very difficult to understand. I think I mentioned this in the previous video. We have juries in trials about white-collar crime that cannot understand what is going on because the economics, the mathematics is so complicated behind a lot of these sort of high-end banking scams and so on that Joe Public, a jury of your peers, cannot hope to understand what's going on. And so a lot of people are getting off on these crimes because juries cannot understand them. What about big issues like climate change or fusion investment or long-term economic policy, things like this? These are how are any of us really supposed to understand what's going on there? Who should be able to influence those decisions? Should MPs defer to experts? Should the public defer to the MPs and then the MPs defer to the experts? How do we make that a stronger thing? Because at the moment we often have problems where ideology and fact bump heads. So, like, for example, there is no evidence whatsoever that pornography causes rape or sexual crime levels to go up or anything like that. And yet, no matter how many reports we have saying this, we still have censorship, and it's getting worse. And it's very similar with drugs. Any number of experts will tell you that the best thing to do is to legalize and control, or at least decriminalize. And yet, because it's not seen to be a vote winner or against ideology, many political parties just won't even entertain the idea and will even fire experts who tell them otherwise. Crazy. So how can we be more meritocratic, more technocratic? How can we give experts more weight in our system? So in the next video, I'm going to talk about some of the ideas I have about how, if we built a system from the ground up, we could insulate against some of these issues. We could construct a governmental system that was adaptive, valued expertise, was still responsive democratically, and hopefully got around a lot of these issues. Take care, guys. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachu, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachu.